Hi and welcome to Thinking in Fusion, a video manual for Clickteam Fusion 2.5 covering the free edition and the full edition. I'm Adam from Impact Gamers and I've been using Clickteam software for nearly 3 decades. We're on section 5 looking at artwork, animation and audio. As with this series, we'll be looking at the way Clickteam Fusion can implement certain things. So this isn't a tutorial to get a certain effect, it's more like technical information and explaining where things are. If you haven't seen the other videos in this series, don't worry, you can watch this one independently of those. It's just that I may reference things from other videos. So 2 important things to say before I start this video. Firstly, Clickteam Fusion is a great introduction to games design. You can make some fantastic games, but don't expect to be able to easily make realistic looking games in Fusion. It's a 2D games engine with a 3D plugin, but if you're looking for hyper-realism, Clickteam Fusion 2.5 isn't for you. It is for you if you want to make a great game quickly and you don't mind the game art being retro style, hand-drawn or stylized. Secondly, and I'll probably labour this point throughout the video, finished artwork and finished sound are the last thing that you should add into your game. When designing the game, set things up with some basic artwork or even just coloured blocks and concentrate on getting the game mechanics and the gameplay to be just right. People may be attracted to a game because of its art or music, but they stay because of the gameplay. It easily becomes a distraction, so don't let it be that. And far too often, I've come to the end of a project and had to redo the artwork due to changed ideas or a clearer understanding of the game. In this video, we'll summarise things and then go in depth. So in the summaries, we'll cover the picture editor, we'll look at all the animation sequences of active objects and how they automatically get applied, importing artwork and audio. Then in the in-depth section, we'll look at all the picture editor tools. We'll look at how you can set up events to control animations, including transparency. We'll look at the animation sequences in depth and directional animations. And then importing artwork as animation with sequences or sprite sheets. And then we'll look at music and samples in the audio in-depth section, looking at using channels and all the parameters you can change in the event editor. So, without further ado, the summaries. Welcome to the picture editor, sometimes called the image editor and accessed either in the frame editor or the workspace toolbar by right-clicking on an object, choosing edit, double-clicking on the object, or selecting an object in the frame editor and pressing enter. The picture editor is a simple way to add some artwork to either an active object or a background object for use in your game. It's broken down into 4 sections. In the top left, it has all the tools that you can use. On the top right, it has a colour palette that you can choose from. You can choose a foreground or a background colour by left-clicking or right-clicking respectively. Also, next to where the foreground and background colours are shown is another colour. This is the transparent colour, represented by a checkerboard. Top middle is where the actual image is. Clicking on the image will apply the tool that you've currently got selected. Bottom left, you have a list of animations. We're going to summarise these separately at this timecode. Bottom middle, you have the animation frames, you have a direction compass, and you have a tab for direction options, where you can change the animation speed and looping. Finally, bottom right is where you can play your animation, confirm your changes with OK, or cancel. So here's a quick use example. We'll load up the picture editor on an active object. I'm going to click the clear button that looks like a piece of paper in the top left. I'm then going to slide the zoom bar to get it to a good size. This is not changing the size of your picture, just looking at it closer. I'm then going to use the brush tool. I'm going to select a colour off the colour palette by left clicking to get my foreground colour, but I'm also going to right click to set my background colour that I'm going to use later. And I'm going to draw in the available space an outline for my character using left click for the foreground colour. I'm then going to access the fill tool and I'm going to right click in that outline to fill it in with my background colour and press OK. We'll look at each tool individually and look in depth at how to use this at this time code. When you load up the picture editor for an active object, you have the animation list, which comprises of 12 pre-named animations. All of these animations can loop, meaning that the image frames get played one after each other and then can repeat. That'll be covered at this time code. Fusion automatically uses an animation sequence on a certain thing happening. Here's the summary. Stopped is used when an object's speed is 0. Walking is used when their speed is greater than 0. Running is automatically used when the object's speed is 75 or greater. Appearing is automatically played when the object is created, either at the start of the frame or through an event that creates the object. Disappearing is played when an object is destroyed. Bouncing plays when there is an event action for bounce. Launching is played when there's an event action to launch an object, and that object is created from that action point. We'll cover action points at this time code. Jumping is used if the movement of the object has a jump, such as platform. Jump is played when you press the jump button. Falling is played automatically when you travel downwards, if the object movement has a gravity applied to it. Climbing is automatically used when the object is overlapping a ladder, if you have platform movement. Crouch down is used in platform movement again, when the down direction is pressed, by default the down arrow. And stand up is linked to crouch down, played automatically when you let go of the down button. You're not limited to just 12 animations though. You can right click at the bottom of the list and click on New. Then you can name that animation sequence. These new animation sequences, and even the ones that are pre-named, can be activated as an action in the event editor. Right-clicking on the active object, going to Animation, and change animation sequence. But we'll cover that at this time code. Importing artwork. This is a quick summary looking at how to import art. Open up the picture editor and click on the import logo. It's like a yellow folder. From there you can import PNG files, Targa, bitmap, JPEG, but you can also import animation files such as AVI or GIF. When you import an image, you can choose what the transparent color will be. If it's already got an alpha channel, a transparency, that transparency will get imported with it. To see the more advanced options, go to this time code. Sounds and music. The summary. Sound files are not objects in Clickteam Fusion. They're just files on the computer that you add into your application by adding them through the event editor. So in the event editor, you can right-click on the sound column. You have a choice between samples and music. Music is music files, sort of MIDI files, not music in the normal way that we have it, but individual notes saved into a file. Music files, MIDI files, will run on a Windows computer, but if your game is for web or for mobile, then everything will be a sample, not music, even if the sample is music. So right-click under Samples, and we can choose to play a sample, and we choose the lower Browse option from a file. Unless you already have another game that has the sound in it, we're going to choose from a file and browse. Clickteam supports a whole range of sound files, but the most common ones might be WAV, OGG, and MP3. Then, when the condition is met, the sound is played. There's a whole range of options that you can have for playing sounds, and that's all covered in the in-depth section here. That ends the summaries. Let's go in depth. the picture editor in depth. Although I said this was a basic tool for being able to edit your picture, there are quite a lot of features. But before I show you the individual tools, I just want to start explaining about colour. The colour palette. You can have two colours selected, left click being the foreground, right click being the background. A tool with a single colour will allow you to left click and use the foreground colour and right click and use the background colour. So it doesn't matter if something is in the foreground or background, it's just a choice of colour, left click being the colour that's at the bottom in front, the foreground colour, right click being the button that's behind the background colour. And later on, at this time code, when we look at the tools that will do an outline and a fill, they use the foreground for the outline and the fill for the background when you left click, and the reverse when you right click. Now the colour palette is quite limited. It hasn't got all the colours that you'd expect. In here, we can access all 16.7 million colours that you'd expect from 24-bit. If you double click on either the foreground or background colour, you end up with a more advanced colour palette. Clicking custom allows you to set the hue, saturation, luminance, or the RGB, the red, green, blue values. This is really important. This picture editor, it does support transparencies with alpha channels, but it doesn't do it in such a simple, inherent way that you'd expect. So let's break it down what it's doing. If I click on the transparency icon here, I have an option for a transparency colour. And this is what's happening behind the scenes. So if I click show on that, we can now see that the transparency colour has changed from a checkerboard into a solid colour. In this instance, magenta, RGB value of 255,0255. And this exact magenta colour acts as see-through. And that's why if I try and draw with the magenta colour, it will come out as transparent. If we ever want to change what the transparent colour is, we can double click on that transparent colour box, which is signified with the two slashes in it, and we can redefine a new colour to be treated as transparent. And this transparent colour might explain sometimes when you copy and paste artwork into your picture editor, the black becomes see-through, or whatever colour you have as transparent becomes see-through. But it can be used to our advantage. If I open up Paint and use it to draw a character, copy and paste it, I'll get the white background in. So now I'll clear the image and we'll paste it in again. But this time I'm going to set the background to be black, pure black, 000, our transparent colour. So now when we copy and paste it in, it has transparency. So having one colour as your transparent colour doesn't allow for fading and blends for alpha channels. But in the next section, I'll talk about when we import art that already has an alpha channel, Clickteam supports that. That'll be covered when we talk about importing artwork. Now we've got that technical transparent colour out the way, let's look at the actual tools. First off, we have the clear logo, which is a blank piece of paper, which will just set everything to be transparent. Note, you can't have the first frame of an active object being transparent. The next two icons are for importing and exporting, and they'll be covered in the next section. Then we have some settings. We can choose right click to draw with our background colour or to pick a colour. Now there's a keyboard shortcut of holding shift which will pick a colour, so it's always best to leave right click as draw as background colour. If you're drawing something that contains a lot of white and grey, you might want to change the transparent checkerboard colours from white and grey to some darker colours. And the option to resample, which is anti-aliasing, which means that it will blur the pixels as it resizes to make a smooth colour. The cut, copy, paste, delete, undo and redo you should recognise from any other program. Then we have options of flipping horizontally to mirror the image, and then to flip vertically to mirror it but top to bottom. Crop is an auto crop. So if you've drawn a character that's smaller than your area, crop will draw in the sides to make it fit exactly. And transparent colour we covered with the colour section earlier. Zoom, the magnifying glass, is a slider to allow us to zoom, but we can also use the mouse wheel to do that also. On to the actual editing tools. selection with the shortcut of B allows us to draw a box, a marquee around an area and either cut, copy it, or just press delete and delete it. The color picker, shortcut P, allows you to choose any color that's already on your image and left click to set it as the foreground color or right click to set it as the background color. The brush tool, D. This is your go-to tool for drawing anything. We have some options, whether it's a continuous brush, a solid line, a discontinuous brush where it's on and off, and a one-touch brush. We click and that's the only pixel that's affected, no matter how long we hold down for. The discontinuous brush can be good for when we want to add speckled effects. The size is how big the diameter is in pixels. It's a circular brush, so the bigger the size, the more circle-like your brush is. And we can set opacity if we want to add a tint to something. But be aware, if the opacity isn't 100% solid, it means that you won't be able to draw in the transparent area. So in effect, what you're doing is you're tinting pixels that are already drawn. This can be really useful for adding a shine. And with these brush tools, you left click for the foreground color and right click for the background color. The line tool, which is an L, like the brush tool, but only draws in straight lines. Then you have different shapes: rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and shape tool. All of these have similar features. They allow you to draw the outline of the shape, the filled in section, or an outline with filled in section. For the rectangle and the ellipse, you can click, hold, and then hold Shift to lock to make a perfect square or circle. Remember, holding Shift and then clicking picks a colour. With the polygon tool, every time you click, it joins like a dot to dot to dot, and double clicking or clicking on the first pixel completes it. The shape tool is a freeform version of the polygon tool where you can just drag out a shape, and when you let go, it will complete that shape from where you are. The fill tool will change the pixel that you click on and the surrounding ones, depending on your tolerance, to be that color. So a high tolerance of 100 will fill in all the pixels surrounding that have a color difference up to 100 from the one you click on. If you hold down Alt while using the fill tool, you will then apply the fill effect for all the pixels that are the same color as the one that you're clicking on. The spray tool is like a fuzzy version of the brush tool. To use it, you probably want to set a quite low pressure because the pressure is how opaque it is. The text tool, shortcut T, allows you to type text on the screen. Be aware that you can move the text while the text box is up, and you can change the font, the bold, italic, underline. You can even change its color. And just close that text window when you're happy with it. The eraser tool is like the brush, but it's square and it's always transparent. You can use this to remove sections of the image. Resize allows you to set the width and height of the image that you're working with in pixels, but you can choose it to be proportional, meaning that the aspect is held so that if you change the width, the height will automatically adjust, or vice versa. Stretch means that the image will be resized to fit the new area. You'd use stretch to make your image bigger or smaller, and you wouldn't use stretch if you just want to increase the size available of the drawing. And resample is anti-aliasing. Whether it stretches or shrinks it. Pixelated, if resample is not turned on, or if resample is turned on, it will smooth out the pixels. And you must press apply for this to work. Rotate allows you to set an angle in degrees counterclockwise and press apply. And then you have a hotspot and action point. Now the hotspot, as we've said before, is where Clickteam measures all of the distances from that object to other objects. It's also used in physics objects for the center of mass. The action point is a place where objects are created when they're launched from an object. And you can also link things to either the hotspot or the action point. You can click on the screen to select the X and Y, or you can type in. You can also use the quick move to place things centrally or in corners, and you can use the C to place at the center of mass. A shortcut for both the hotspot and the action point is if you hold down Alt while adjusting it on the image, it will adjust all the frames in that direction animation sequence. Animation options in depth. When I'm talking about frames here, I'm talking about animation frames, the individual pictures. I know that our level is called a frame, but these are different. These are the images in the active object's animation. A useful thing to point out is each animation sequence can have its own direction animations, and each direction animation has its own animation sequence, and each animation sequence has its own animation frames. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that if you want to copy one of the frames, just right click on the frame and copy it. If you want to copy the animation sequence, you can right click on the direction of the animation sequence and copy that. If you want to copy all the directions, all the animations, all the frames, then right click on the animation sequence name and copy that. And obviously you paste things in the same area you've copied them from. For any active object, you can choose how many directions have an animation built in for them. By sliding the little slider on the clock face or the compass, you can expand from 4 directions, 8 directions, 16 or 32. And by default, these will be used when the character is travelling in those directions. Each direction holds its own animation sequence, which is really useful if you're varying the speed of the animation or the amount of frames in the animation, depending on the direction of travel. Above the clock type compass, we can see how many frames we have in our animation. We can also add frames in our animation or subtract frames from this bar. When adding a frame, it will duplicate the current frame you're on. If we clear this frame, we can get the reference of either the frame before or the frame after by using the slider above direction options to create something called an onion skin, a ghost-like semi-transparent image of either the frame before or the frame after, depending how far you slide it. This is really useful to match up position and size of what you're drawing. As with most things in Clickteam Fusion, you can right-click to get extra options. So right-clicking on an animation frame allows you to choose between new frames, cloning, to zoom, which is a way of resizing it, rotating, flipping it, selecting, and the cut, copy, paste and deletes. So if we click on direction options, we get extra animation options. For stopped and for some other animations, you only get one speed setting, how many frames it will play per second. But for some, such as walking, jumping, stand up, and most other ones, you get a lower speed and a higher speed. How many frames of the animation play per second? The only difference is, these can be affected by the speed that this object is travelling. And then you have the repeat options. You can choose to repeat it a set amount of times, so it plays through the animation a certain amount of times and then comes to the last frame and stops. Or you can set it to loop indefinitely to keep on going through again and again, and it can choose where it loops back to. A jumping animation might have the character crouching down, jumping upwards, but then you want to loop it back to the frame where they're upright. Otherwise they'd keep on crouching down in the air. A really important thing to note, these frame numbers show you how many frames you have. They're not actually the number of the frame. So what I'm saying is you may have 3 frames and they're labelled frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, but the reference, the way that the event editor references them is 0, 1 and 2. So the referencing always starts at 0, and it says that in the event editor, under an active object, under animation, when you change the animation frame, it will tell you the first frame is 0. Do bear that in mind. Also, another useful thing to know is that if you set the animation frame in the event editor to be greater than the number of frames there are, Clickteam will just choose the last available frame. So say if we have the 3 frames and we set the animation frame to frame number 6 or number 10, anything above 2, it will set it to frame reference 2, because frame 3 is actually referenced as frame 2, 0, 1 and 2. Controlling the animations! So we've looked at all these different animations that get used by default because of the way Fusion is made. How do we control it? Well, the conditions we have available is we can check for an active object if an animation is playing, if it's finished, and the current frame. It's the current frame value reference, so it's starting off at frame 0, not 1. We can also trigger some actions. We can stop the animation playing. We can start an animation playing again. We can change the animation sequence to any of those from the list. We can change the direction of the animation, how quickly it plays and the speed of animation, or we can change to an animation frame, which will stop the animation sequence from playing. And remember, the animation frames start off at 0. To put those back as they should be, we can then restore them. And then there's some options that are vaguely to do with animation. So we could paste the object into background to be an obstacle or a ladder, or just to be a background object. It's so important that you need to be aware of being able to restore the animation sequence, the animation frames, the animation speed, because you can get to a point where you set an animation and Fusion will stay stuck to that animation or that frame. And the only way out of it is to restore those different aspects of the animation to get it back to normal. I recently had that issue with a bunny that needed to climb. When it got off climbing the wall, it was just stuck in the climbing animation. And so I had to resolve it with restoring animation. I think we've covered everything with animation. Let's go to sound. Now let's look at importing artwork in depth. As I said before, the picture editor or the image editor in Clickteam Fusion does its job, but its art tools are quite basic. You'll need to import artwork in order to get something looking really spectacular, unless it's just pixel art. I'll use Photoshop for this example, but any image editor, such as GIMP, Paint.net, those free tools and similar tools will work in the same way. Firstly, we'll look at alpha channels. Alpha channels are the see-through areas of the picture, but more than that, they can be tinted, so you can change how see-through an area is. So for this picture of a car, I can select the windows and I can lower the opacity. Now, if I save this as a PNG, and PNGs are probably the best format for importing into Clickteam. Clickteam will understand the alpha channel, and when using that artwork in game, the windows will be transparent and I can see objects behind them. Even though Clickteam understands about the alpha channels, if I resize the image, Clickteam will try and use its transparent color. So ours is black, and if we resize our image, it will use that black to make up for the transparency, and we can end up with pixelated black edges. It's also worth pointing out that if you try and edit the picture or move the picture, it won't work well. So it's always best to do that in your Paint program and re-import it into Clickteam. Make sure you save multiple versions in your Paint program in case you need to go back for a larger image or anything else later. Image size. Clickteam Fusion can have a really huge frame area, tens of thousands wide and high. But if you put one large image into your level, the memory allocation, the way that it handles it, will slow things down massively. And seriously, it really has a huge effect. Try not to use massive pieces of art in one object. Clickteam will handle lots of small objects far better than one big object. If you do want to have a very large picture as the background in your game, you can use an object that's called Active Picture. An Active Picture object takes an image file from your computer and then displays it. So it's not preloaded in, but loads when your frame loads. So for an example, I'm going to insert a large backdrop of space, 6,000 pixels by 6,000 pixels, and there it is. An active picture behaves in the same way as an active object, but the artwork isn't preloaded in, saving a lot of Fusion's memory. You can also change the artwork in the event editor. The actions for active picture allows you to load a new image. Just be aware that if you're making a game on a different device or for use on a different computer, Clickteam will need to be able to find the file. Importing animations. One of the great things is that when you import artwork, you can choose to import it as an animation or as a sprite sheet. Let's look at animation first. If it's an animation, Fusion will look for an image with a number one higher than the one you selected. So say if you have artwork called Run 1, and that can be a JPEG or a PNG. But like I said, stick with PNG, and then you can have transparency. It's a new slogan. If we have run1.png, then it will look for run 2, run 3. Now, it can't have anything after that, and the number needs to be at the end, but it can have preceding zeros. So you can have run 001, and then it'll look for run 002. Once Fusion finds the extra files, it will show you how many frames will be added. And you can choose to replace the current animation so that the animation sequence is just what you're importing, or you can insert it before or after the animation sequence that you've created. Sprite sheets. Sprite sheets have all the animations, not numbered, but all of them next to each other in a grid. Sprite sheets are often used with low resolution art, such as retro art and pixel art. Sprite sheets have the advantage that you see everything at once. So if you want to color swap something or adjust something, it's all there in one file. The block size is how it's going to be cut up. So the width and the height of each frame or each animation cell once cut. Then Fusion will cut the image into a box that size multiple times and insert it as frames of an animation. Crop images. This will allow Clickteam to cut out any transparent area around the image. If you have checked Keep Original Hotspots, that means that when you import your image, all the hotspots will remain the same for the frames with their new images. So it's unlikely you want that. The hotspot by default is around 1515. You'd only really want to keep original hotspots if you've already made an animation and you're just updating the artwork, but none of the sizes change. So if you uncheck that, you have a choice of where the hotspot is, that central point, that point of measurement, and where the action point is, the point where things are created. You can also import just a selection. So you can check import selection and select an area. You also have import as selection, meaning it's not going to be a new animation, you're just adding artwork onto the current frame. You can drag and drop an image into the frame editor and Clickteam will automatically import it as artwork. Now, depending on what previous settings you have on your import options, those will be applied. So if you want to insert something as an animation, make sure that you've chosen that. Exporting! So the final part is looking at exporting, the opposite of importing. Now this isn't available in the free version of Fusion 2.5. In the picture editor, you can click on the disk icon. There are 3 types of exporting. This will only export the animation frames for the current animation and the current direction. You can export the current image, which will just save it as a PNG. You can export numbered image files, so it'll export the animation that you're currently on with the suffix of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or you can export it as a sprite sheet. And for sprite sheet, you can set the image width. If you check box mode, then that will outline the boxes on the sprite sheet. The great thing about exporting in Clickteam is it'll export in PNG, a lossless format, and so you can edit that and then you can just re-import the exported image files or sprite sheet, and you can keep the original hotspots so that all the image update doesn't affect any of the positioning. So we're now ready to look at the final section in this video, sounds, samples and channels in depth. Sounds, samples and channels. Like with artwork, we say leave it till the end, make the gameplay work, then sort out the artwork. Sound even more so. The more you add sound to your game early on, the more of a distraction it's likely to be to the game making process, and the more annoying for people in the room with you. So do try and hold back on sound. But here's how sound works in Clickteam. These are the things that Fusion can check for regarding sound. And again, they're broken into samples and music. So see the summary earlier on before looking at the in-depth bit here. At this timecode, in the event editor, under samples, we can see if something's not playing. Then we can check if there is a specific sample not playing, meaning that an actual sound is not being played at the moment. And then a channel is not playing. A channel is where a sound can play. Only one sound can play on one channel at a time. By default, in the application properties, in the runtime options, multi-samples is checked. Here you can also choose when sounds stop, whether they stop when you go between a frame or when your game isn't in focus in Windows, like you're looking at the desktop or opened another application. If checked, the sounds would continue. But going back to the channels, by default, with multi-samples, Clickteam will naturally play a sound in the next available free channel. So you can have up to 48 sounds playing at the same time. And if you make a mistake with your coding, you play a sound on one of the black events and it's constantly true, it will fill all 48 of those channels with the same sound, and it sounds hideous. This most often happens with background music, so I'll show you the right way to do that at this timecode. As a programmer, we can actually define if we want a channel to be for a certain thing, such as background music, or an announcer, or player character's dialogue. And that way we could check if a sample is playing on a certain channel. For example, if we decide that channel 3 will be the channel that we play all of the player character's dialogue, we could then have a condition, samples, is a specific channel not playing, channel 3, then we know that the dialogue for the player has finished.
Are you ready for it? Let's go!
We can also check for a sample being paused or a channel being paused. For music, these are the MIDI files, these are the musical instrument digital interface files. They're not often used, but you can just see whether they're playing or paused, or specific music is playing. And you can also check if something's just finished. Music doesn't have multi-channel, so if you're playing some MIDI music and play other MIDI music, the new MIDI music would stop the old one and take over. Now the actions for playing a sample. We're going to set up some background music. Our new condition is not going to be always. We don't want to always play the background music because that will always start playing the background music and get the hideous noise again. For background music, we'll do new condition and from the storyboard controls, start of frame. This is a one-off green event that happens at the beginning of this frame level. So we'll right click under sound, samples, and we'll go through play sample all perimeters because this will cover a lot of the other options in one go. We'll choose to load it from a file, browse, open the file, and the first perimeter to choose is channel number. So we can choose a specific one or 0 for the next available. Then, if it repeats, 1, we'll just play it through once. 1,000, we'll play it 1,000 times. So we want it to loop continuously, so I'll set it to 0. The volume is just a percentage. Because it's background music, we'll set it low to about 30 or 40%. Then we can choose pan. Fusion can output stereo sound, so we can choose if it's either the left speaker or the right speaker. But because it's music, we'll say 0 in the center. might be quite nice if you have a character coming on from the left-hand side of the screen for it to play on the left speaker. Frequency. This is how high-pitched or low-pitched the sound plays, how quickly or slowly it plays. 0 will just play it as normal. 100 is so slow you might not even hear it. Then 1,000, 10,000, and 100,000. We'll leave it at 0. Now, when we run our game, sound plays in the background. Let's look at the other actions. When we play a sample, it gets loaded in. Clickteam saves it within our game, increasing our game size and meaning that if we delete the sound file, Clickteam still has its own copy. You can see these files in the Data Elements window. From here you can play them, you can even replace them, or you can resave them by extracting them. We can have an action to play a sample file. Now a sample file is different from a sample. Playing a sample file leaves it separately on the computer. It doesn't increase our game size. If the file gets changed, Clickteam will play the new file, and if the file gets deleted, Clickteam will play nothing. We can actually not choose the exact file name, but use an expression. This way, if you had multiple sound files with a number at the end, you could get it to randomly choose which sound file it's playing. Look back to strings and values to see how you can combine those two together. A file name is always a string. Then, some self-explanatory actions are down here. We can pause a sample or a channel or everything. We can resume a sample, a channel, or everything. We can stop a specific sample playing. Now that only works if it's not a sample file, but if it's a sample that's been loaded into Clickteam. We can stop a channel from playing, stop any sample playing, which will just stop everything. And then we can control the volume, either the main volume, individual samples, or a channel. Do the same with pan. And with newer versions of Clickteam, you can set a sample position, so you can jump to a specific time. You can change the frequency of samples and channels, and you can lock a channel so that it can't be affected and unlock it. So an example of a character talking, all of these are the negative, not playing. But we can negate these to check that something is playing. For the example of the character speaking, if channel 3 is not playing, negated, as in it's not playing, it is playing, then we could change the animation of the character's mouth to talking. That may run into an issue when animation can get stuck. See this timecode. So we're just going to put in a limit condition by right-clicking on the words, inserting special limit conditions, only one action while event loops. And we've already got the opposite of that. So when channel 3 is not playing, we've already got a limit that animation talking is playing, then we'll change the animation sequence to stopped. So if we set this up with some timed events, we can have the character's mouth move when it speaks, like this.
Are you ready for it? Let's go!
No, that's strange. I find that out of order. I just don't care.
A final thing about audio compatibility. Even though Clickteam supports MP3, OGG and other files, it might not play the file because the sample rate is too low. You can test this by trying to play the file in the Data Elements window. To get the file to play in Clickteam, you'll need to open up the sound file in a different application. I use Audacity, that's free. Then I export it again, this time at a higher sample rate, such as 22 kHz, 44 or 48. Then in the full version, you can just replace it in the Data Elements, or in the free version, you can find the action that plays the sample and replace it. Loads of things to add to your game, but the art and the sound do not maketh the game. I didn't want to leave art and sound till right at the end. So we've done art this time, and we're going to go to the other end. We're going to look at some programming techniques that Fusion has so that you can get exactly what you want happening while we look at qualifier groups, loops, counts, and I'll throw in timed events as well. See you then!